Thank you, Jan.
Thank you, Dan.
We are okay. We have been setting up the audio and the video, so bear with us. However, I think we now have the ability to show Peter the presentation here in the room. Let's move to him. I would like to introduce our keynote speakers for today. First is Peter Norton. He's on faculty.
Charlie, you like to speak up?
We can hear you.
Oh, yeah, the room can't quite hear, so if we can just speak up.
All right. So Peter Norton is a faculty member at the University of Virginia. His most recent book is called Auto Nomi Rama, and it's about the fact that after almost a century, the latest technology.
Charlie, hold the mic close to your mouth, please.
That's it's not only speakers. Yeah.
The latest technology in cars is not going to solve traffic. So with that, let me introduce Peter. And Peter, I think we have your presentation.
Thank you very much, everyone. I can speak about slides if necessary, but if you get them up there, that's a plus. Thank you for your hospitality. There's an inherent advantage in technological simplicity, and at this point, that's been improved. The more complex your system is, the more opportunities for failure you have. And I think that's the beauty of passenger rail. Passenger rail requires tech, primarily tech that we've had for over a century. Even if we're talking about electrified passenger rail, we've had that technology for well over a century. And then the risk of complicating factors that we see, for example, with cruise or Waymo vehicles is much less. They're working out the kinks, just like we've been working them out here, and with mixed success, as we've seen here as well. Now, if that can go full screen, that would be a plus. Okay, take your time, no problem, no stress. What I'm beginning here with is a sort of thought exercise. What would you get? What do you predict you would get if you entered into the search bar of a Google search the letters EV as an electric vehicle? What would you get? And I tried it this morning, and that's what I got. 100% passenger cars, many of them SUVs, with a battery, often a battery weighing 1,000 pounds. This is what we think of when we hear the words EV. We think of just about the least efficient EV ever made. It's also the only EV we tend to get. If we go to the next slide, you see my reconstruction of that search. That's a phony search result. I manually named it because I think this is what we need to see when we type in EV. See, it's quite small, but I think we can see bikes and predominantly railed vehicles like trams, electric trains, even trolley buses, and also e-scooters. These are EV electric vehicles as well. Why is it that when we hear EV, we think of an SUV with a battery and not a much more efficient, much more cost-effective, much more affordable, much more sustainable vehicle, many of which don't need batteries at all because they can draw their power from overhead wires or a third rail. And that makes them also, that absolves them of one of the biggest weaknesses in battery electric vehicles, which is that the battery minerals we will have to, we can't possibly supply all the battery minerals we need for 100 million or a billion passenger vehicles. If we go to the next slide, you can see also that besides this particular misframing of whereby an electric vehicle means a passenger car, we also have other misframings, like, for example, spending on highways as an investment. while spending on an electric public transport system is a wasteful subsidy. This is a beautiful cartoon by Andy Singer. And I want to make this talk about why that is and what we can do about it. Now, I'm going to guess that everybody or nearly everybody is acquainted with The Wizard of Oz, especially the 1939 movie version. And you know something about how the wizard, who was actually sham, a fraud, a con artist, made himself seem credible and believable by being very intimidating and projecting his image up on a screen as if he was some kind of giant-brained wizard. Of course, he was not a wizard at all. As he says himself, he was a humbug. And the message of that movie, of course, is don't be taken in. Well, I fear we haven't been paying attention to the message of this movie or not. We're being taken in. Please go to the next slide. The title of this talk that I gave it after the program was written is Pay No Attention to the Man Behind the Curtain, the high-tech sideshow that prevents the change we need. Please go to the next slide. And so I've got these parts here. Each is about 5 minutes. I'll try to make them about 4 minutes at this point. Go ahead. And in fact, I can advance the slide myself, if that might be more efficient. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Can we get it full screen?
And if you can, oh, no, I can't. I'm sorry. My bad. All right. Why don't you keep advancing the slides? If it can, yeah, if that's as big as it gets, we'll live with it, but it's not full screen. Yeah. Yeah, and I'll just keep going, and if you can make it full screen, great. If you can't, no problem.
Slideshow. Slideshow.
Yeah,
Turn on the slideshow.
well, I'll let Charlie take that advice if you choose. Great, much better. Oh, even better yet. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So we have such people today. I know we're picking on Elon Musk in particular because he's just one of the more visible examples of this wizard, really a humbug, I'm trying to say. These are people who make us promises. Now, the fact that these promises can't be kept, and I don't think they can be, is bad enough. But what's really worse, I fear, is that the promises divert us from the things we can already do today with the tech we have now. They are telling us if you wait 10 or 20 years to have tech that will do everything for you, so don't even bother with electric trains and that stuff, that claimable stuff that you're all nostalgic about that's in the past. We want to give you something even better that they never delivered. And you notice how this is just like the story, The Wizard of Oz. At the end of the story, it turns out that, of course, Dorothy and the Cowardly Lion and the Tin Woodman and the Scarecrow all had what they need. They got it themselves. They thought the wizard would have to give it to them. The lesson of the movie is no, you have to develop it yourself. Well, that's sort of the message I'll offer you as well next time. And we've had these wizards around for a long time, and I want to walk you through a couple of generations of this time game. There's an expression you probably all heard it: fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Well, we've been fooled 4 times now. We've been promised that there's a high-tech transport future that will make everything happen and everything possible, and we don't have to do anything because it'll be hand-delivered to us. I want to walk you through those 4 deceptions with the hope that it will better equip us to not be taken in again. Next slide. This guy on the left is Charles Kettering, who's the vice president of General Motors. And he kind of invented the technique that we're now still struggling with, which is you promise people a future that's impossible. And his associates and scholars were like, well, why would you do that? He said, because in pursuing the impossible, you can sell people a lot of stuff. Because if you like the metaphor of the horizon, you can never get to the horizon, but if you approach it, you'll walk forever. And for him, walking meant buying GM products forever. And he put this up in a 1929 news article or a business magazine article called "Keep the Consumer Dissatisfied." Why? Because a dissatisfied customer needs something, and you can say, "I've got it, I'll sell it to you." You don't want to satisfy the customer like Henry Ford was doing next. And so, a little introduction part is unkeepable promises. Why do they work? Next slide. I think the best answer I can find to this question comes from Arthur C. Clarke, an engineer, a scientist, and a science fiction author, most famous for 2001: A Space Odyssey, next slide, which you see in this poster. The same time he was writing his screenplay, Arthur C. Clarke wrote a letter to Science magazine, and in it, he wrote, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." There's his actual text from that letter. Now, this is a profoundly important statement. He's not merely saying every sufficiently advanced technology is impressive. Everybody knows that already. What he's saying is it has an effect like magic does. What does magic's effect have on you? Well, when you see magic, you have to agree that something you thought was impossible is possible. And this effect is the secret to selling us impossible futures. You make it seem like you have the magic that will do it, and the magic is always the state-of-the-art technology of that specific time. So in 2023, it's 5G, it's LiDAR, it's radar, it's sensors, it's processors, it's connectivity. Those are the things that seem magic to us now. Whatever is magic in a given era, you can use to sell things that are impossible, even with that technical stuff. And so we see, for example, companies like ZF today selling automated driving systems, and you can see that that same company's predecessor company on the next slide. And there it is. The same company has been selling driverless cars since 1958. Notice people enjoying the car game in their car while the car drives itself in 1958. They're saying, we're going to deliver this. Its descendant company, ZF, is saying the same thing. And in practical terms, and practical has to include cost effective, they still haven't gotten there. Instead, we've got absurdities like this. The money that's gone into this, including billions in public taxpayer money, has achieved useless wonders like the least efficient train ever built. What this is a bunch of Oldsmobiles that are spaced thanks to this, the state-of-the-art tech of 1997. This is San Diego, 1997. Public money at work, private investment at work, proving that these cars can go 50 miles an hour, even though they're spaced only about a dozen feet apart, which of course is the least efficient train ever built. It has one person per car. Yeah, you can put in a couple more. Each car has to have its own engine. And then the worst part is when they hit the exit ramps, you have the worst backups ever. You can't find any parking for this whole train. How did we get there? That was my effort to find out how these absurdities continue to divert us from things we have right now that work well. That's what this book is about. Next slide. And, in these 4 eras, you can see that for each one, I don't know if you read it, doesn't matter. The state-of-the-art tech of that era is used to bamboozle that generation. So every generation since the 1930s has been bamboozled by the state-of-the-art technology of that time into believing that an impossible future in which cars serve every passenger mobility purpose is possible and even desirable. Because of the fact that our generational memories are imperfect, we forget this, we don't remember these early Futuramas, and therefore we continue to be deceived next time. And so Futurama 1, Futurama is a term that Charles Kettering helped invent. It's a fusion of future and diorama. Why? Because to sell people futures, you have to make them look vivid and attractive. And therefore they made dioramas, vivid dioramas of the future. And I'm going to start with Futurama 1, next slide, which was foolproof highways. That's theirs. Next slide. And what they were substituting for was this world, what we would now call sustainable, equitable, affordable, healthful, efficient, spatially efficient mobility. This is Rochester, 1904. Those are electric vehicles. Those are EVs in the middle of the screen on rails. Nobody calls them EVs, but that's what they are. You can see it's walkable. You can see bike racks. Next slide. I circled all the bikes in there. There's dozens of them everywhere. And there's no e-bikes yet. This is pretty amazing. Next time. And I just want to show that this was true in multiple cities. Go ahead and go through this one and next one. I don't take time reading that. Okay, stop here. Now, when we mix that world with fast automobiles, we had catastrophic results. These charts show you that lots of people were getting killed by motor vehicles every year, that in cities and towns, the people getting killed were overwhelmingly people just trying to walk. and that the people getting killed included enormous quantities of children. The right-hand graph shows you that the biggest bar chart on people killed by motor vehicles was children ages 4 to 8. I actually think these people hit by motor vehicles, just people 4 to 8. Next slide. And this caused anger, not at the parents for letting kids out on the streets, not at pedestrians because they were using streets the way everyone had always used streets before, because streets were for everybody. The anger was at the motor vehicle, its driver, and the companies that were pushing this on there. The next slide. And you see in this era that the people killed by motor vehicles, particularly the pedestrians, were honored. And in newspaper cartoons, we can see where the blame goes. It's going to the driver, it's going to the vehicle. Next slide. We can see that the blame was on speed. Next slide. Consistently on speed. And that meant that in the conventional wisdom of 100 years ago, the remedy was not to rebuild the world around fast driving, which is what we've since tried to do, but rather to limit the maximum speed of motor vehicles. Next slide. Which is why we've got proposals like this one in Cincinnati to mechanically limit cars to a maximum of 25 miles an hour. So you could not go faster. Next slide. This terrified automobile interest groups into massive campaigns like this to resist this and to promote a different alternative instead. And it's that different alternative that we inherited. Next slide. They came out in favor of the gasoline tax. This map shows you where the gasoline tax was in its first generation. Automobile interest groups wanted the gasoline tax on condition that the money go only to roads. Next slide, because they were saying, if you really want safety, if you really want congestion relief, then what you have to do, go ahead, is build these foolproof highways of the future. That's what grade separated, divided highways were supposed to be. Next slide. And notice that they are selling the future. This is really at the beginning of this concept, not just selling you a product, but selling you a distant future where this product is everywhere, where not only you, but the government has to buy this product, and where this future is never achieved, but it's made attractive and vivid enough to convince people to pursue it. Next slide. And that's where we get Futuramas, like this model, which began at the Shell Oil Company in 1937, saying there's a future where you drive everywhere, you never have to stop, and you have no problems at all. And what makes this credible is the state-of-the-art technology of that era, and also the vivid, attractive depictions like we see here. And we see that the foolproof highways are not only supposed to make traffic crashes impossible, they're also supposed to cure congestion. Next slide. And we see these combined efforts. Every time a person is killed, that becomes not a reason to slow cars down or to promote rail, but rather a reason to build highways everywhere. And to cure congestion means not to promote more spatially efficient modes of passenger transportation, but instead to build more highways as well. And Charles Kettering was a promoter of this idea, and his preferred metaphor, next slide, was the horizon. And he was deliberately choosing this because you can't ever get there. He's telling you a future perfection. It's an ingenious metaphor. It's almost a revealing metaphor. Next slide. That manifests, as most of you I think know, in a way at the New York World's Fair of 1939. This is 1939. It is, of course, the same year as The Wizard of Oz. I think there's an amazing visual comparison here. We go to the next slide between that and the yellow brick. And let's go one more. And we can see it's almost one. We see. And incidentally, it is the same thing. It is like, I, the all-powerful GM, can show you the future if you will only pursue it along this yellow brick road. Next slide. And right inside the model, I think we can see this yellow brick road. What's supposed to make this credible? Next slide. The electronics of that era, vacuum tube electronics, radio electronics. Next slide. It gives you magic. Remember, Arthur C. Clarke said it's like magic. Well, vacuum tubes were like magic to people then. They don't impress us anymore. But they were the thing that delivered Franklin Roosevelt's voice into your living room. That was a magical experience if you have not had that before. Next slide. And so we have Futurama 1. It's actually pursued. Next slide. And when it's actually pursued, it gives you something more like this. You can see this is Portland, Oregon, and it's been erased to store all parked cars that all of these foolproof highways funnel into it. Of course, they weren't foolproof highways either, because at this time, about 45,000 Americans were being killed a year on roads. Next slide. And so the cure for congestion, and next slide, and it leads to efforts to transform cities like Detroit, which you see here on the left. That's the black neighborhood of Detroit called Paradise Valley. And 2 years later, next slide, this is what happened to it. It's the same view. This community was destroyed. The suburbanites it brought in were nearly all white because the suburbs were segregated. The community it destroyed was a community of people who mostly did not drive at all for the sake of this car, and all justified by this fantastic, bizarre vision called Futurama One. Next slide. We see interest groups behind it, like the American Trucking Association, saying we need these highways to relieve congestion. We see a reply, next slide, from the railroad people. I think this is a wonderful diagram. It talks about 2023 as much as it talks about 1959. We have the endless spiral of more roads means more driving, means more congestion, means more roads forever. But, and next slide, we can see this was actually very controversial. This is a rail versus road critique in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in 1958. And it's showing you an abandoned commuter rail network where a station that looks actually somewhat like the one we're in now, neglected and decaying while everyone's stuck in traffic on the roads. The cartoon here is incidentally Bill Malden, very famous for his GI cartoons from World War II. This is a mainstream cartoon. This is not some fringe critique. This is in the city, St. Louis's biggest newspaper. Next slide. Now we see other critiques. You've probably all heard of Jane Jacobs. Next slide. And her critique. Next slide. Now, to the people selling Futurama One, this could mean, I'm sorry, we were wrong. We'll shut up and get behind common sense transport. I think you can guess that was not the reply. Next slide. The next slide shows that the real response was to come up with a new generation of Futuramas with a new technological basis for credibility. Next slide. And that credibility was called magic. Again, notice the word magic is a recurring word because this is our visceral response to amazing technology. We see amazing technology, we think anything's possible. The amazing technology of that era is transistors, space age tech. Love that sound. Next slide, please. So notice the depictions of electronics in next slide. And you can see that these electronics are being celebrated. They can't possibly make driving everywhere efficient and workable. But it's not that what's possible that's an issue. It's how do we make people believe that this future is possible? Next slide. We see, and this is advertisement on the right is from RCA transistors from 1964. They're selling the same thing we're being sold now. Next slide. The electronic highway of the future is supposed to make it such you can press a button, you can take your hands off the steering wheel. Next slide. And the real culmination of this was called Futurama 2. Some of you have heard of it. It was at the New York World's Fair in 1964 at the same place as Futurama 1. This is GM's term, but Ford had a similar exhibit. Next slide. And you can see that this is all supposed to work now. You should be wondering, how did anybody fall for this anymore? The answer was, oh, but we didn't have transistors for Futurama 1. Next slide. And we see at the same time, the so-called experts of that era, people like Jerry Kiefer, who's in the little picture there, claiming that the actual persistent high demand that we actually did see through this era, largely incidentally because it was still a one-car family era. Most families had a car. Most families had only one car. And guess who tended to monopolize that car? So women were driving transit. And because nearly all of the transportation experts were men, they had a habit, many of them, of saying, well, everybody drives. And of course, they meant by the word everybody, they meant everybody like me drives. And that includes Kiefer, who was a top engineer with the Institute of Traffic Engineers. Next slide. And he's saying, I will never concede that people want to travel collectively. Notice the word collectively. He said, this is the era of communism, anti-communism, and he's invoking this idea. Next slide. Nevertheless, because of the devastation, we see people like Alice Lipscomb organizing stop highways, a university in Philadelphia successfully. Next slide. We see the first Earth Day, that's New York Times 1970, showing you they made Fifth Avenue all pedestrian zone for Earth Day, and everybody loved it. You can see how popular it was. Next slide, we see new values like E.F. Schumacher's bestseller, Small is Beautiful, that says maybe simpler can be better. A lesson I think we've learned in a couple of ways so far today. Next slide. And therefore, we need Futurama 3. Futurama 3, word magic was worn out its welcome. Let's replace it. How about smart? Smart. Excellent.
Because I like his school, but it was like,
Yes.
a single standard.
Okay, I appreciate that very much. So of course, we're going to need, we can't do transistors anymore. Transistors are now old hat. It's going to be the tech of this new era, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, next slide. And this is best expressed through things like the Apple Macintosh, which is based in turn on, next slide, a microprocessor. This is the amazing technology. Notice this is demonstrating the effect that Arthur C. Clarke had already named more than a decade earlier when he said any sufficiently advanced technology is insufficient, indistinguishable from magic. Next slide. This term smart as a word to apply to tech really was basically unknown to people until the Gulf War. Some of you, I think, will remember when all of a sudden CNN and all the news stations were giving constant coverage and showing you footage of munitions hitting with precision targets in Iraq. Now, of course, about 94% of the munitions that were actually used were not smart, but you get much better coverage, much more interesting coverage from the cameras from the smart munitions. Next slide. And a lot of free publicity. That's General Norman Schwarzkopf in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, giving a press conference. And the press loved the kind of footage you see on the right. And what this did was elevate the reputation of so-called smart technology, making it seem magic. And believe it or not, these smart munitions, the first thing that happened domestically was the people who made it said, we're going to use that to eliminate all traffic congestion. You watch. Next slide. So they came out with ads like this one that say, we will use our smart tech to eliminate traffic congestion. Next slide. And we're applying our defense technology of today to battle gridlock. Our military technology will eliminate traffic congestion. I don't have to tell you, it never got anywhere close. It never even made a discernible difference. But the tech was so impressive that people were willing to go along for the ride. These are called smart highways. I think you may remember the buzz around them from a couple of decades back. Next slide. How it's supposed to work? That's somehow it's supposed to make people believe it work. It's primarily supposed to work on highways, which are actually already the most free flow traffic you can find. Is where this tech had a slight chance of having some kind of benefit. It was not going to be useful where we really have serious traffic congestion on the roads and streets of America. Next slide. And we had a demonstration in 1997, thanks to private investment in public money. This guy's showing off that he's got his hands off the steering wheel. This is 1997 in San Diego on a test lanes of a highway. That car is driving itself, supposedly, although he's using a gas pedal and brake, but it's steering itself. And the reason why it's steering itself is that it's following tens of thousands of embedded pencil-sized magnets in the road. That's what it took to get it to do this. Why it was supposed to be worth doing is anybody's guess. In fact, the press considered this pretty much a flop. Next slide. There's where we get the history of the least efficient train in the history of the world. Right there, there it is. In San Diego at demo 97. On the next slide. So when you have a failed Futurama, you have to try again, and you can make it credible if we use the state-of-the-art technology of that era. The promoters of this call the tech that we're talking about here autonomous technology or autonomous vehicles. Please, if you think for 1 second, maybe you've already thought about this, you will recognize that the very last thing you ever want an automated machine to do is have autonomy. Frankenstein had autonomy. What does autonomy mean? Autonomy means, well, I do what I feel like. It's like autonomy is what your kids got at some point, like you wanted them to get it at 18, they decided to get it at 14, something like this. That's autonomy. Autonomy is I get to do what I want. So if you hear the word autonomous vehicle and it's honestly used, that's a vehicle that if it feels like, going 150 on a 100 speed, it's going to do it. And if it doesn't, it's because it does not have autonomy, but rather because its programmers and the companies that operate it made sure it had the exact opposite of autonomy, which is determinism. They want a deterministic vehicle. They call it autonomous because the word robot, which is what we're really talking about, these are robots, or the autonomous vehicles are robots. But the word robot, like the word magic, had lost the spell. And people aren't impressed by it anymore, but autonomous still impresses. So this is what convinced people that the tech of that era was amazing. Now, General Motors with a Chinese partner company called Shanghai Automotive Industries Group got together in 2010 and tried a Futurama exhibit again. It's always 20 years in the future, so that was 2030. Note that we are, substantially on the way to this, 2/3 of the way there, supposedly. They put it on in a pavilion that was reminiscent of Futurama 1. Next slide. There's the exhibit. As you walked into this exhibit, next slide, you passed a sign that said it's going to show you a future with zero emissions, zero petroleum, zero congestion, and zero accidents, 20 years away from now. Next slide. And it was going to be delivered through these kind of vehicles, including, you see in the middle, that's a vehicle with an artificial leaf on top that conducts photosynthesis. Now, as you know, photosynthesis enables a tree to grow, a couple of millimeters per day on a good day. This is supposed to make this vehicle go 50, 60 miles an hour. Next slide. And this means you'll be able to engage in social media. I have read the internal industry reports. You know what really excites them about driverless? It means they can finally get you paying attention to your phone or other devices so they can collect monetizable data. We want to align the interior of these vehicles with infotainment systems such that you will be generating data and that they can turn into money. Now, if you're having to look at the road, that's very frustrating for them. The next slide. And General Motors is now, and this is 2017, but they still have the same tagline that they introduced then. And it's zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion because of robot cars. Next slide. Robot cars with batteries. We see a future without congestion. Why? Well, because we put some very impressive looking high-tech lines on this thing. Next slide. And we see a future where you're not looking at the road, and therefore you and your kids are soaking up unlimited entertainment. The last frontier being when you're asleep. I'm sure somebody's working on how to get you to generate monetizable data when you're sleeping. I don't know what that is yet, but I would bet 101 odds somebody's working on that. Next slide. And you are, so notice this, the expression on the insiders is data is the new oil. This is from Intel. Intel wants to collect the data for the automakers, convince the automakers to work with them. They say data is the new oil. What do they mean? They mean you and me are the oil well. And they're going to extract that oil from us and monetize it just like they did with oil. Only now it's data. And that's why driverless is good. Next slide. And so they even have, just as a General Motors video commercial, where they say, it's going to be so fun in our driverless vehicles that when you go out for a night with your girlfriend, just like in this ad, you're going to be having such a great time that you won't even go to the club. You'll just circle the block all night, generating monetizable data. I am not kidding. That's the promise. Next slide. And they say that this will give us zero crashes, zero emissions, and zero congestion. Next slide. I want to conclude by saying we need to get out of this building, metaphorically speaking. Next slide. And I'd like to quote Wizard of Oz, there's no place like home. What do I mean by home? I mean, the things we already know, the things we already have, if we are smart about how we use them, and if we take state-of-the-art futuristic tech and choose which tech we need and make it and put it to the purposes of our choosing, we can make the stuff we already have work beautifully. Next slide. So to take General Motors' promise, this doesn't show up very well, but the crash record for the US is the worst in the world among the wealthier countries, which is what OECD countries are. Next slide. Emissions, look at USA at the very top of the graph. This is only emissions from driving. USA is off the charts almost, not quite literally, but I had to make the chart bigger to fit it in. Next slide. And congestion, it's a long report that basically says USA is also losing on congestion. So zero emissions, zero congestion, zero crashes. I don't think so. It's not going that direction, and the tech ain't going to make it go that direction. Next slide. What we really need is to recognize that tech we've known for a long time. This is the 1960 ad, showed us that actually electric rail, which is Toronto's electric rail, is much more efficient at moving people. That's not to say you have to ban cars. Why is it that when you say this is good, people think, oh, we want to ban now? Why not do this too? Oh, next slide. And this, so I'm suggesting let's not pay attention to the man behind the curtain. Next slide. And recognize that actually the posters of high-tech driving are very much like the wizard in the Wizard of Oz. They are humbug. Next slide. We need to get to a future where when we think of electric vehicles, instead of this, next slide, we see this. Thank you very much.
Are there questions?
Just an observation, the one EV you missed was the Segway.
Oh, well. You know, I'm not sure it has a feature like this.
It works in the plan.
Okay, I'm sure I'm going to fix the slide.
Jetsons too.
Yeah, so I actually have a version of this where I had the Jetsons, but that was packing it. But yeah, the Jetsons actually does capture that Futurama 3 generation of youth. Guess what?
The Seattle World's Fair, right?
Yeah.
60s.
Absolutely, yeah. In fact, World's Fairs are wonderful places to observe this tendency we have to confuse technology. So technology literally means tool, but it's, you know, you've heard the marketing, it's always called a solution. Now, people will say, oh, well, tool and solution are synonyms. You remember synonyms and antonyms in school, right? Well, no. It turns out, if you think about it for a second, solution and tool are antonyms. Why? Because a solution does everything for you, but a tool does nothing for you. A tool empowers you to do it for yourself. Now, that's a profoundly important difference. Every time you see marketing, where they call tech, every time you see marketing, where they call tech a solution, they're trying to bamboozle you. We need tools. Tools can include very high-tech tools, but the difference is technology can do nothing except if it has a user who knows what to do with it. And when it looks like the tech that you're using has no user because it's so hyper-automated, you are probably now the tool of the people who sold it to you.
Speaking of tools, very young people listening. Ratings, and ratings are back here, ratings started. So like.
Would you speak into the microphone?
I'll repeat the question.
Okay.
Okay, so if I read it, right.
Yeah.
I get wet, so I have to plan my schedule
Yeah.
around the weather. And so a car does offer more utility for that reason, in places where the weather is bad.
Yeah.
That covered walkways. I love something car, but I can't find enough of the vehicle on the market. Let me, we have miles per hour maybe, covered and comfortably, like the car allows. No one really sells. Yeah, I find it a small market, small manufacturers, no one makes it.
Yeah.
That's the tool of this, people sold that, especially in cities.
You're talking about a four-wheel? Yeah. So the question was, right now we're stuck in here between having a car, which is likely to be a big moving forward vehicle now, or a bike. But what happens if it's bad weather and you like something that's approximating a bike in efficiency, but is an interior cabin, a small cabin. And of course, there are such tiny cars. You see in an Amsterdam, for example, they've got things very much like them in Japan. We don't have them here, strangely in part because safety, well, why is it dangerous to be in a little car? It's not because the little car is dangerous, it's because the big cars are dangerous. So presumably we begin the regulation of the big cars. They do, as some of you know, they bike in the rain in the Netherlands, and if you say, how come you're biking in the rain? Isn't that hard? Their answer is, I'm not made of sugar. They all say that. I've heard it myself. I'm not made, they're saying, you know, I'm strong. Now, maybe that's a bar we can't hope for, but I agree with you 100%. It would be good to have something that is very, we almost had, we used to have a class of cars called economy cars, and, you know, it's hard to find anything like that anymore. And I'm not a fan of cars, but I would like to see more economy cars.
I think there's such momentum towards autonomous cars that notice it's not. What I observed is every time it gets to a certain level and has an accident, the legal system steps in to slow it down. So I think it's inevitable we can do autonomous cars in some kind of hypothesis. I think the impediment, the rate limiting step will be the legal system, not the technology.
So the question or the comment was, autonomous cars are inevitable, but what we see is a kind of oscillating back and forth where we see advancements and then we see somebody gets killed and then the legal system kicks in and regulates it. I would like to comment on that in a couple of respects. One is, when I had that question myself, so I talked to engineers. I'm not one myself, but I'm from an engineering school, so it's easy. And my read of the engineers who are not in the pay of the corporations is they don't see it happening, not anytime in the next couple of decades at least. Now, I could be wrong about that, but my own qualifications to judge them is not very high. I do have something to say about that in not time around, but I'd like to say one other thing. I think it should disturb us. I think it should disturb us when people come up with the technology and say, inevitably, it will be in all of our lives. The last I checked, we still say that this country is a democracy. And if it's a democracy, I think we should choose the technology, especially if we're talking about shared technology, and transport is inherently a shared system. Even if you have your own private vehicle, you depend on the public roads. And for that reason, I think adoption must be a democratically arrived at process. It should never be presented to us as inevitable. I would go a step further and say that when we say something's inevitable, you're trying to shut us down.
Thank you. We're running a little bit late, but I wanted to move forward and introduce you now that Peter has given us the background. I would like to introduce you to someone who is in a place where they're actually doing something about it. Many of you know Meredith Richards. She is, among many other things, the board chair of the Rural Passengers Association, and she is also from Virginia, from Charlottesville. And so I'd like to introduce you to Meredith so she can tell us what's happening on the other side of the country.
Well, I really enjoyed being here, and thanks to Charlie, thank you, Patrick. I'll have a little bit of a podium here today. Just to know somebody is. And to the way, and for making a conversation for us and for the grandparents, I really appreciate that. I know many of your leaders and many of your members who are active in the Rural Passengers Association. And in particular, you saw a couple of them. I noticed my Christian here on the screen for you, Dan Milka and Harvey Bowman and Barry Green and the number of others who are active in the association. And that's a wonderful thing. We have recognition to the groups in the Northwest, and I'm also impressed with how many active groups there are. here in the Northwest. And that's always encouraging. Wow, what a wonderful talk. Hard things to follow up. Also, I know you're all waiting for lunch, but I hope you can appreciate the position that puts me in. I'm asked to speak to Virginia of Passenger Rail. Some of you may know that that is a, can I move this? Oh, I see. Well, I need to stop there. Right. It's getting back. Okay, I'm a little bit here. I don't, I'm sure you wouldn't know this, but my husband lives with me. But he came from Charlottesville, Virginia. My husband just retired after 49 years at the University of Professor. And he and Professor Peter Norton have been colleagues in the engineering school for many years. It just happened that we were both invited to speak at this, and for what polar opposites we are, and not in terms of disagreement. We are very much in agreement. I need to do this.
No, I'm gonna suggest you put it on.
Oh.
For the sound. Certainly, that's what like this.
Really? No kidding. All right, well, let's do it.
Let's see if that works anything.
All right, okay. Now I can't hear anything. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Oh, wonderful. Well, we discovered secrets. Wonderful. How marvelous. And then I'll dispense with this. May I move it? Yes. Now that I'm so. Yes, it's a like Peter and I are polar opposites in the sense that what he's talking about is a great predecessor for what I'm going to talk about, which is hopefully technology of the future. Back to this, I often say that rail advocacy is about back to the future, and that's really what I'm here to talk about today. Since I've been a rail activist, passenger rail activist in Virginia for over 20 years. And since becoming chair of the Rail Passenger Association, I've traveled across the country and I've met with groups like yours who are working to restore passenger rail. It's something we want to have a lot of in your communities and in your areas. Everywhere I go, where your work inspires me. You know, it takes to be a passenger rail advocate. It takes being an optimist, but sometimes we're up against what seem to be unsurmountable obstacles. And speaking of Mike Christensen, Mike, I'm sorry about Utah, and I hope things change there somewhat with your house. But yeah, we're against obstacles and impossible goals that we're setting. And sometimes we have to be willing to work a long time to achieve them. But we are working to change over a half century of misdirected transportation policy that all the destroyed passing and unsustainable in so many ways. We are changing these misguided policies have left millions of people in large swaths of the country, including the greater Northwest, Southwest, much of rural America, and small cities and towns near Keynote, everywhere, without access to reliable public transportation, abandoned first by their trains, then by their airlines, by the interstate bus lines. Almost 1/5 of Amtrak's passengers travel to or from a rural station with no access to air service. In addition, we've left some America's larger cities, Phoenix, Columbus, Las Vegas, totally unserved by independent counties, right? And many more, such as Cleveland, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, San Antonio, on and on, who remain underserved. As recently as the mid 1950s, my small city of Charlottesville, Charlie, that is what you, yeah. That's very disruptive. I'm sorry, I can't talk when it's doing that. All right. Are you hearing me all right? Oh, wonderful. Thank you. As recently as the 1950s, my small city of Charlottesville had 22 daily passenger trains at all times of day and to and from Washington, D.C. By 1971, when Amtrak was formed, all that remained were the daily Crescent, which was still the Southern Crescent at the time, and the 3-day-a-week Cardinal. And thank heaven for our long distance trains. They're still the lifeline of passenger rail in America. So when demand the right to safe, reliable, on-time rail transportation, a right many even today seek to deny, we are simply trying to recover what people once had and are entitled to have again. I'm often asked how we managed in Virginia to make the kind of progress that the Federal Railroad Administrator Amit Bose, Amtrak President Steve Gardner, and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg have all referred to as a model for the country. Looking back from the perspective of someone who's been on the front lines for a long time, it's because for 30 years, Virginia has played the long game. It's fair to say that Virginia is richly served and has been served for a long time by Amtrak long distance trains. Fully 1/3 of Amtrak routes run through Virginia on their way to the Northeast Corridor, to Washington. These trains are connecting Virginia passenger services. But we've also had a great success in developing state-funded regional routes that connect all Virginia's major cities and many of its smaller towns and cities with twice or sometimes 3 times a day service to Washington and the Northeast Corridor. Amtrak Virginia now operates 8 daily state-funded round-trip trains on 3 routes connecting Washington and the Northeast to Norfolk, Newport News, Richmond, and Roanoke, including 4 stations not served by Amtrak long-distance trains. All of these projects have occurred in the last 14 years, although the public work and our policy successes as advocates has taken a much longer time. Virginia regionals have fully recovered from their pre-pandemic ridership. They have fully recovered their pre-pandemic ridership, not from it. July of this year was the highest ridership month for our regional trains ever in Virginia history, with over 1 million passengers in July alone. Virginia regionals have served nearly 1.8 million passengers in 2023, and we are easily on our way to 2 million passengers in 2024. These are all state-supported regionals that I'm referring to. And an analysis by an organization that I am president of, the Virginia Rail Policy Institute, found that Virginia regionals alone reach 80% of Virginians within 20 miles of the station, while 83% are within 20 miles of any Amtrak service,
83% of our jobs and 88% of Virginia colleges and universities are now within 20 miles of a station. We have more work to do in rural Southwest Virginia, where we are going to be extending the Lynchburg train to Christiansburg, which is the site of Virginia Tech University. And there's a new east-west route across the state that is slated to be developed in the next decade that will connect these communities in far southwest to the far southeastern part of the state in Hampton Roads through Richmond, across the Commonwealth, from the Blue Ridge to the beach. So as Virginia's passenger rail program was taking shape, what was occurring over a longer period of time was a progression of successful public rail policy initiatives that established the institutional, financial, and legal framework for a robust 21st century rail program. Virginia rail advocates have assisted very strongly in establishing these public policies and getting them passed into law and even drafting model legislation on occasion, and then enlisting our allies in the administrations, in General Assembly, and VDOT, in the Rail and Public Transportation Department to sponsor bills, to help us develop bills, which we followed with aggressive lobbying and action campaigns, and mobilize the voices of thousands of citizens to support them. We've been known to collaborate with state transportation officials on legislative initiatives to advance passenger rail. I call this policy focus advocacy, and it's one of the distinguishing features of our advocacy in Virginia. This is fundamentally different from the more traditional model of route-focused advocacy. Now, the idea of route-focused advocacy is to develop public and political support for establishing specific routes, or extending routes, or adding service frequencies, and generally enhancing the performance of a specific route on a specific corridor. All important work being done by coalitions across the country. The idea of policy-focused advocacy, however, is to set up state and regional passenger rail for long-term success by creating the capacity for more routes and more enhancements in the future. Once you have your new route of service, although it's a great thing, you're not one and done. Instead, you play the long game and prepare the way for more routes and better services in the future. And citizen activists in Virginians for High-Speed Rail and the Virginia Rail Policy Institute in particular have helped develop those public policies over the years. Let me move on. I think the idea of a Virginia Rail Policy Institute is actually fairly unique. It's not something that I've seen in any other state so far, but our goal at VRPI is to help develop better rail public policies for the state of Virginia. Let me tell you a little bit about the history of how we got to where we are, because that's what I was asked to come speak to today. The first step was taken over 30 years ago, when our Democratic Governor, Doug Wilder, established the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation in 1992 as a separate division from the Virginia Department of Transportation. 2 years later, a group of business leaders in Richmond had a vision for high-speed rail from the southeast to the northeast through Virginia, and they enlisted the support of some key state senators from both sides of the aisle. And in 2000, our Republican governor, Jim Gilmore, invested $100 million in improving the Richmond to Washington corridor as a first step to high-speed rail. They also at that time created Virginians for High-Speed Rail as an advocacy group. And also 2 years later, the Virginia Rail Policy Institute as an adjunct to the advocacy organization. And after 27 years, VHSR, Virginians for High-Speed Rail, is a statewide organization that ties together all the groups and all the projects that we're advocating for, and is at the center of all of that. And one of our early legislative victories was leading a successful effort to create the Virginia-North Carolina High-Speed Rail Compact and make it official in the state code. This fostered a collaboration between Virginia and North Carolina that continues to this day, and they work together to jointly develop higher speed rail from Raleigh to Washington and the Northeast Corridor. And then in 2002, we had kind of a seminal event that helped put Virginia on the road to what has been a very strong bipartisan program in its history. And it's happened when I was on the Charlottesville City Council and was serving as president of the Virginia Transit Association. We secured a large foundation grant to bring a bipartisan group of 32 state elected officials on a tour of rail facilities in the Pacific Northwest. And here they rode light rail, modern streetcars, and intercity trains, the Cascades, I might mention, and learned about their many benefits and seeing transit in the General Assembly. And about the same time, Governor Mark Warner, now Senator Mark Warner, appointed a commission to visualize what a 21st century rail program for Virginia would look like and what it would take to achieve it. This was in 2004. I was a member of that commission, and in 2005, we established Virginia's first dedicated sustainable fund for rail capital improvements. I do love that sound. It was called it's a Rail Enhancement Fund, and it was funded with revenue, ironically, from the state's vehicle rental taxes. But it could not officially be used for passenger projects or federal matching funds, and for several years, the Rail Enhancement Fund was used exclusively to support priority freight projects for Norfolk Southern and CSX. Our organization, VRPI, the Rail Policy Institute, published a comprehensive report on the fund's performance, in which we recommended a more visionary and broad plan for using the power of public rail infrastructure investments in the public interest. And this was timely because it soon came time to secure the freight railroad's first agreements to host the state's first passenger projects. And the Rail Enhancement Fund was leveraged to fund the, quote, capacity improvements the railroads demanded in exchange for hosting the state's passenger trains. At about the same time, I and a group of Charlottesville citizens were organizing an advocacy campaign to bring more and better trains to Virginia's US 29 corridor, from the North Carolina border to the northern Virginia suburbs. We created a coalition of stakeholders throughout the corridor, the US 29 corridor, and enlisted 22 political jurisdictions in a campaign to bring additional passenger rail to our communities. Much like you do. We eventually won Governor Tim Kaine's support for Virginia's first state-supported intercity passenger train on the corridor. It was the Lynchburg Northeast Regional, with only the first year of operation paid for with reprogrammed funds and no guarantees after that. So our little train was so successful that for a number of years, it was the highest performing corridor train in the Amtrak system, with the exception of the Acela in terms of cost recovery. We had a very generous agreement with Amtrak. The ticket revenues from our train more than paid for its operation, freeing up state funds to invest in 2 more Northeast regionals connecting Richmond and Norfolk to DC Union Station and the Northeast Corridor, and continued to pay the operating cost of those additional trains for a number of years. But then with 3 state-sponsored Amtrak trains to support and no source of operating funds, the next governor, a Republican, Bob McDonnell, realized the need for a sustainable resource to support Virginia's growing fleet of trains. So Virginians for High-Speed Rail partnered with the administration in a campaign to establish the Intercity Passenger Rail Operating and Capital Fund, supported by a small increase in the state's sales tax. At that time, the annual revenue from IPROC, we call it, was about $55 million, which kept our trains running and allowed the state to continue to develop the network. The next 2 Democratic administrations added frequencies to Norfolk and Newport News trains and extended the Lynchburg train to Roanoke in the Southwest. A second frequency of the Roanoke train was launched in 2017, and that service will be extended to Christiansburg and the New River Valley by 2026. In addition, a new route across Virginia was proposed in a report prepared by Virginians for High-Speed Rail that will restore a historic east-west service across the state, which I mentioned before. In fact, Virginians for High-Speed Rail helped write the bill to study the feasibility of that service. And I'm happy to say that what we are now calling the Commonwealth Corridor, the east-west service, is a future project in the statewide rail plan and has been accepted into the FRA's Corridor ID and Development Program, literally proposed by rail advocates in Virginia for High-Speed Rail, who wrote and researched the original proposal and presented it to the governor and the General Assembly. But it was in the administration of Democratic Governor Ralph Northam, just prior to the pandemic in 2019, that Virginia took a giant step forward. During the 2019 Virginia's General Assembly passed 2 similar resolutions in the Senate and the House requesting the Commonwealth Transportation Board to study, speaking of solutions to congestion, a 52-mile stretch of the I-95 corridor that a 2017 study by the Texas Transportation Institute ranked as having the worst traffic congestion in the nation. According to the study, widening even 50 miles of highway by 1 lane in each direction for 50 miles had an estimated cost of $12.5 billion. And while that cost was staggering, the most sobering aspect of the analysis was the prediction that by the time construction was completed in 10 years, the I-95 corridor would be just as congested as it is today. The better solution, rail. It was decided by the administration that the most cost-effective solution for both the short and long term was to increase the throughput capacity within Virginia's rail corridors along I-95 and elsewhere. Rail coupled with transit and road spot improvements was the recommended alternative, a solution for moving people rather than more cars through the corridor from North Carolina to Washington. So on December 19, 2019, I was present when Virginia's Secretary of Transportation, Shannon Valentine, announced a 10-year, $3.7 billion landmark deal with CSX that will transform intercity passenger rail, commuter rail, and freight rail in Virginia. The framework for these initiatives is a series of agreements with CSX and a short line railroad, Buckingham Branch, that mark significant departures in the way the state has historically done business with the freight railroads. It also includes interjurisdictional agreements with the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Amtrak to jointly fund construction and publicly own and operate a dedicated passenger rail bridge across the Potomac River. In these agreements, the state has purchased over 350 miles of right-of-way from CSX and 225 miles of track to allow a billion-dollar build-out of infrastructure for third and sometimes fourth tracks dedicated to passenger rail only in the DC to Richmond corridor. It also includes the acquisition of 170 miles of CSX track operated by the Buckingham Branch Railroads that will provide the key link in the restoration of east-west service between Charlottesville and Richmond to complete the Commonwealth Corridor route proposed earlier. Most significantly, Virginia's Transforming Rail Initiative includes construction of a $1.9 billion long bridge across the Potomac exclusively for passenger trains. After over 100 years, passenger trains will no longer compete for slots on a two-track bridge, which is at 98% capacity and carries all the freight, commuter, and state-supported regionals and Amtrak long-distance trains across the Potomac. This will free up an incredible amount of capacity for the expansion, further expansion of passenger rail for Amtrak, Virginia Railway Express, which is commuter rail connecting Virginia DC suburbs to Washington, and all routes that cross the Potomac. Over the next 10 years, these investments will double Amtrak's state-supported service for nearly hourly trains between Richmond and Washington, enhance service for Newport News and Norfolk, and increase Northern Virginia commuter service by 75%. In short order following announcements, the General Assembly passed a transportation bill that transforms the way Virginia finances its rail program, and it added significant new funding for rail. It also established a passenger rail authority to oversee the expansion and operation of state-funded intercity passenger rail. And only recently, the Federal Railroad Administration announced a $100 million CRISI grant for one of these projects and a $1 billion investment in the Richmond to Washington corridor. Part of this series of investments that were just made. So what about policy? I know I bring up policy all the time because I am a policy nerd. I was in local government. And I believe that policy innovation has been what's driven our progress and what will sustain our progress into the future. Virginia has adopted a host of innovations in public rail policy that are a radical new approach to our state rail transportation in this new initiative. And these align, incidentally, with a number of recommendations that our Policy Institute has been making for years. We've set measurable, the state has now set measurable long-term goals for passenger rail in the I-95 corridor. They're putting public money dedicated to state initiated versus freight railroad initiated capital projects. We're entering into debt financing for some of the cost of Long Bridge. We have entered into rail infrastructure for passenger projects. We have acquired abandoned and underutilized freight rail lines for mitigating the congestion in the corridor. We're undertaking public-private joint operating agreements on rail rights-of-way. We're separating freight and passenger rail operations with lines dedicated to passenger right-of-way. And we have a new passenger rail fund called the Commonwealth Rail Fund that now receives 7.5% of the entire state pool of transportation dollars, including fuel taxes for rail, fuel taxes, sales taxes, a variety of fees, and our two pre-existing rail funds, all going into one fund, which amounts to 7.5% of the entire state transportation funding. And then finally, the Passenger Rail Authority, which will own the public rail assets and oversee the projects and the operation of these trains. So this has been, you know, uh, talking about challenge to the status quo. This really wrapped it up in one big package. And we're very proud of that in Virginia. And that's why I say you have to work towards the future. You play the long game. And that's how it's happened. I don't take the credit. I wasn't the author or the innovator in most of these cases, but I did participate in it. And I think it makes a difference between what we can do and what we should be doing in the future for passenger rail. So I came to chair the Rail Passengers Association, partly because I saw parallels at what they're doing at the federal level and what we're doing in Virginia with our policy work at the federal level with the Rail Passengers Association. And I'm especially proud of the role that our president, Jim Matthews, and our director of government affairs, Sean Jean Scale, played in actually developing and writing 25 pages of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. They wrote a good portion of the rail section of that act, including both funding programs and the regulations. So a lot of what you're seeing evolve now, a lot of the new funding programs and the Corridor ID program and the Corridor Development Program that FRA is undertaking is being done because of that act, and RPA had a major role in writing that legislation. So we do bring the voices of colors of investment as a result of this act. It's actually up to 75 billion after some extensions. And we will be modernizing through this act vast stretches of the existing US passenger rail network and in undoing decades of disinvestment in passenger rail. So it's time. We have reached a historic moment in passenger rail in America with unprecedented opportunities, some of which were spoken of this morning at the first panel, for growth in both rural and urban America alike. Rail can play a central role in America's transportation and economic future, and we can't let this opportunity pass us by. The time is now, and thank you very much. The time is for lunch. Thank you. And the time is now for lunch too. Thank you. I'd be glad to take questions. I imagine you're all rather tired of sitting, but I'd be glad to take questions.
Hey, do we happen to have any questions online?
Yeah, let's see lunch. Thank you.
All right, feel free to put any questions in the chat that you might. We are going to take a quick break for lunch. Thank you for your patience with all these technical difficulties. Literally holding the camera here. And we'll see you again soon.